Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. Our focus topic is showing you how to manage resource work and capacity planning using Microsoft PPM. My name is Sarah Howard, and I'm with a Microsoft Gold partner called PROJILITY. We've been implementing Microsoft project and portfolio management solutions for over 16 years now for large enterprises. So that includes everything from engineering, construction, IT, and new product development. People tend to get a hold of us when they can't easily explain what's going on across all of their projects. They don't know what resources are working on what work, and they have a hard time getting consistent reports, metrics, and dashboards to make project-based decisions. At PROJILITY, we offer services and solutions in 3 core areas. The first being deployment and consulting services, which is our core business, where we provide professional services for successfully planning and implementing Microsoft project and portfolio management, including Microsoft's Project Online, integrating PPM with line of business applications, and delivering strategic portfolio management solutions to support top-level management planning. We also have a growing business intelligence practice that leverages best-in-class solutions such as Microsoft's Power BI. PROJILITY offers a set of pre-built software solutions and accelerators based upon 16 years of experience, including a set of Hammerhead products that provide improved access to your cloud project and portfolio management data, accelerated access to visual reports and dashboards using Power BI, and connecting data between your PPM system and Azure DevOps, Teams, Microsoft Planner, and Active Directory to improve visibility, insight, and control over your work, people, and projects. Finally, PROJILITY provides post-implementation support services, including expert care, which is designed to assist your PMO with gaining on-demand expertise on the solutions supported. We also offer training for your end users and administrators and have an e-learning offering that can improve consistency and adoption for your users of your project management tools. We do have a set of upcoming webinars covering topics ranging from managing costs on your projects with Microsoft Project to building a solid work breakdown structure to manage your projects. All webinars will start at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so you can register for one or multiple events through the Eventbrite link provided or by searching Eventbrite PROJILITY in your browser. We hope you can join us for these sessions, which were designed based upon your feedback over the last 6 months. If you missed the PROJILITY Virtual Project Conference back in October, you can now watch it online. It's broken into 3 sessions, the first being clients sharing their best practices for deployment. PROJILITY then speaks on considerations when looking at Project for the Web versus Project Online, as well as how to improve your existing Project Online environment. And finally, we have a Microsoft expert speaking on the direction of the products. You can visit the link here, which takes you to the YouTube playlist where the videos are posted. All videos from this and previous series are available on our best practice playlist on YouTube, which is listed on this page. You can find topics ranging from managing your digital transformation program using PPM technologies to integrating PPM with Agile and line of business applications. So feel free to subscribe and access this library at any time and share it with your colleagues. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rob Hirschman, who is a partner at PROJILITY, and he will be going through our content today. So Rob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to be focused on resource capacity planning, capacity management, which is probably the top request we get from a lot of our clients and prospects who are looking to really use project management technologies to improve their business process. We'll focus on first what the business problem we're seeing out there is, some of the challenges organizations are running into around resource and capacity management. We'll talk about, spend most of our time here actually digging into the different components that are built into Microsoft's Project Online or PPM solution, specifically designed to address these requirements, talk through how do you get started, and also give you some good practices towards the end about planning for an implementation. Finally, we do have some time allotted at the end to answer any questions you might have. So if you do have questions as we go through this, just log them in the Q&A manager and we will take them at the end. So if we look at really what we're trying to address with resource management, the core business problem people are running into really relates to different sets of stakeholders and different sets of expectations. And on the left side, you have the project owners. And these are the folks that have the funding, that want results, that are willing to invest in the projects at whatever cost it takes to get those end results. On the right, you have the functional managers, and these are the people that manage people in your enterprise or your organization. And they're responsible for things like people management, skills management. So you see, we initially have a conflict between the two, and ideally they're all working together towards the same end goal. But at the end of the day, the folks on the left, they want results. They have a project, they're investing in multiple projects, they want results, and they want to see some kind of a result from the investment they're making. The folks on the right are really concerned about people management, skills management, utilization management, and more people are tasked with working on multiple projects in more functional areas. So it really becomes a challenge between the people that have the money and the need and the people that have the people, and those folks working together. And in doing some research based off our clients over the last 12 years, we found that 95% of them named resource management to be their top priority as they think about rolling out a project and portfolio management process, updating their people with good procedures, as well as rolling out a technology. So if this is something in some of the pain points you find, you never have enough people, you have more than enough work, you have very little internal data to really have a discussion about who are the right people and what's their availability. And if we look at, who owns the resources today, in the past we've had different kinds of ownership, and in the late 80s, 90s, all the way through then, we had really functional management on the left of resources where you can see there's a hierarchy, people roll up to different line managers. Really in the 90s and early 2000s, that rolled over to see what you see on the far right, which is project-based work, where you have organizations that roll up to different project teams, and those project teams end, they roll onto different project teams. So there's constantly a dynamic on different project teams and managing those people. The world we live in now is a matrix set of organizations in the middle, where you've got a combination of line management at the top, project management on the side. You even have product managers and agile teams or scrum masters. And then you've got the resources who are really tasked on working on different tasks and activities in different ways. And it becomes a challenge between the types of methodologies, the management, the stakeholders, the type of work that's being done, all of that. It makes it much more difficult to do resource management. So what we're going to be focused on in the rest of this is talking about how you can do more successful resource management, some of the trends we're seeing out there, and how you can leverage the technology in a matrixed world. But the first thing we need to do is break down the kind of work people do, resources or people in this case. And if we look at it, there's really a breakdown between three kinds of work in an enterprise or an organization. We've got what we call operational work, which is kind of keep the lights on, maintenance work, things kind of heartbeat of the business. In IT, it can be things like infrastructure and server maintenance. On the business side, it could be things like working on specific day-to-day activities and tasks. It does take up a percentage of a person's job. And in some of the research we've done looking at the analysts, they will tell you it's anywhere from 10 to 30% of people's time. Higher numbers in the infrastructure side, lower numbers in the applications or a business side. So operational work is a big part of people's jobs, keep the lights on or KTLO. The second category of work is what we call administrative time, and that's time people are spending not working at all. So they may be doing things like meetings, which is considered work, but maybe they have jury duty, they have time off. It takes away from their ability to do any kind of project or non-project type of work. And we find that organizations, people spend 5 to 10% of their time doing administrivia as well as not working at all. The third kind of work, which is most prevalent in large enterprises, is project-based work, especially in IT organizations, where we see anywhere from 40 to 60% of an individual's time can be spread across different kinds of projects. And now, with the way the world is, with everything around different kind of methodologies, we have to look at the way people work. Traditional tasks where you've got a task, you've got an estimate to complete, you work towards that completion, you create a deliverable, and you move on to the next. And then we have the agile world, where we're actually moving more towards products, features, and activities and specific results. Those are opposed to one another. It's a very, very different way of working. And yet, as a resource, I'm being asked to work based off who my manager is and who is telling me on a specific project I should be working. So that is one of the inherent challenges here, is that within the project category, that 46%, you're working in different ways. And that challenge can lead to a couple of different things. We find that traditional project-based work can be forecasted. You can sit down with a resource and say, okay, how much time is it going to take? What's the effort? How much of your time do we have to do this? And we can plan that, we can baseline that, and we can track the actuals. When we slide over to the right and we start looking at agile or more iterative work, it's harder to forecast, because the nature of agile is we're not forecasting. We're actually doing it in a series of sprints, and we're actually working towards and picking up different activities. So what we want to do on this side is actually gain some consistency and some consistent language around resources and having a conversation with them. On the Agile side, there's also no concept of really a baseline, right? There are targets, what we're trying to build to, but that could happen over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations. We just don't know, because we're doing it in an iterative fashion where we're building and learning, building and learning. And additionally, we're using more of a team-based approach where we're taking different individuals to work on a specific task versus having one or two people just work towards that specific milestone or deliverable. They're building something or they're working towards something. And then the nature of Agile work, really driven by Scrum, is picking up tasks. You go in and you do your daily stand-up, you pick up tasks or activities, maybe you worked on them the day before, or you have some availability, you're going to pick up new tasks, you move them over into the board to in progress, you work on them, and once they're completed, you move them over to done. So, and Agile really is more focused on the delivery of a product in some way. So we're not looking at a project, a task, a assignment, we're looking at a product and when are we going to deliver this thing, whatever that thing is. So the challenge there is that is often tracked somewhere else. It's not formally in a project management system. That is often done in a system like a Jira or a Azure DevOps, where the level of detail is very different. If you think about it in a traditional project, I can do hours per day, hours per week, whatever that is, per resource in an assignment. In a DevOps system, which is where a lot of people are going now to update their work, started in progress, done. So I really don't have a detailed trail of how many hours I spent, how many are remaining. So it becomes a challenge unless I start to build around a common framework between the two. And that's really important to have a common language there so I can do capacity planning. So you can't just do Agile and do traditional. You have to work on integrating those two from a process perspective and have the tools reflect that. So, we move forward now that we've got the different kinds of work is, what is capacity planning? And in and of the nature of it, capacity planning is a combination of a procedure and process as well as a tool to determine the resources you need based off your future workflow or the demand that's coming in. You need to increase or decrease capacity, whatever you're doing, to meet the needs of that project or that Agile requirement. What it does, it requires two things. Number one, you have to have a look at the current book of business. What are your resources working on today? What's their current workload? And then you have to be able to compare that to the future need. So you have a pipeline of work that's coming in to say, okay, here's what my demand is. Here's my current work and capacity, so I can do effective capacity planning, essentially. And the goal here is really to determine how many resources are required to meet the capacity needs of your group, your team, your project, your organization, whatever level you're at, so you can set realistic expectations. The stakeholders and say, okay, I know you want to finish this by 2 weeks from Thursday. The reality is we only have capacity to do it. We're going to finish 2 weeks after that, and here's why. And to have that data, you need those two data points. What are we doing today? How much work do those people have? How much more work do they have booked? And then what is the future need that's coming up? And it's really important to have that concept in mind before you start looking at the technologies and the tools, because you want to think about, where do I have gaps here? Can I even get current data? I know I have a future look into the workload, but I don't have a look into actual work today. So what we're going to talk about now is some of the things that are built into Microsoft PPM or Project Online, same technology, to help support these type of processes. And the key is you can deploy Project Online to support resource capacity planning. There is a capacity and demand planning component, which you see here. There is an analysis and selection component, which you can leverage to do more strategic planning. There's a time and actuals tracking, which gets you to that first bullet. What are my people working on today? And then there's reporting, so you can pull out, what are my future needs? Where am I versus where I should have been? This is all built into PPM and Project Online. It's a matter of planning and deploying it based off your organization, your process, and your requirements. And within PPM, we've got 11 or 12 different unique functional areas that can be deployed to support these requirements. And the ones with the stars next to them are really, really important when it comes to Agile or any kind of hybrid methodology. So I'm going to go through those here in detail. We just wanted to let you know there's different pieces. It's not just turn on resource management and go. It's determining which of these components are relevant based on the kind of resource capacity planning you want to do. Deploy that, train your users on it, start to grow that functionality, get your data, and then start to grow another functionality over time. It's not a plug and play kind of thing. It's more of a planning around your specific processes. And everything in Project Online starts with the enterprise resource pool. This is the central hub for all of your resources. It's where you're going to store all of the resources, whether they're people, whatever kind of a resource you have, people's, roles, equipment, capital. It's configurable to meet the specifics of the type of information and the way you want to classify your different resources across your organization. We have some organizations that want to go in and look at all the resources across the enterprise. Other ones want to go in and just see resources for specific groups or departments and have their managers manage at that level of detail. And you can do both. It's just a matter of proper setup of that resource pool. The good thing with it is you can synchronize it with your Active Directory. So you can pull in human resources and then have your resource managers update different unique information or metadata about resources. And the key here is for every instance of Project Online you have, there is one resource pool. Again, you can segment that out based off different groups or departments, but that resource pool is really what drives everything around. Think of it as your inventory of all the resources you would use. And the setup of that is pretty important. Now, the first kind of resource we use in Project Online are human resources. And these are the ones that are used to determine actual capacity and actual availability. They are folks like you see on the right, an individual like Jim. He plays the role of a project manager. He works in a department, the IT applications department. He has specific specialties of applications he has at different levels. He has a certain capacity. He has a unique work calendar, and he may be dedicated to project work. Whereas someone at the bottom like Jane is an administrator. She's an infrastructure. She specializes in different technologies, which we can see. She has a capacity that's split between project work and keep the lights on work, and she's a shared resource. So we can set up resources individually based off the unique nature of them, things like the skill and the department, the location. That's all configurable within the tool. Microsoft doesn't know how you want to track your resources, but they give you the underlying tools to do this. The good thing about human resources, they drive your forecast and your actual work. It allows you to manage and measure the performance of these people to see if they're overbooked or underbooked, overutilized or underutilized. And we always want to use this as our hub for actual work. And that's where time tracking comes in, which we'll get into a little later. So that's the first kind of resource. The second kind of resource is something called a generic resource. Think of them as roles. And we're going to use these roles, as you'll see on the right, someone like a project manager, a developer, a DBA, to forecast early wave requests for different kinds of resources. So a request for a project may come in, and part of that request may be, I need half-time project manager, 2 developers, 2 business analysts, a DBA, and a tester at the end of the project. That is going to drive my upfront demand planning. And I use these generic resources to monitor that supply and demand, to see how many project managers do I need over a certain time frame. Then I can map that over to people like Jim and Jane to say, okay, they are both project managers. What is their availability? Who's the right fit? Generic resources are really a foundational concept in Project Online that support any of your resource planning, constraint management, as well as any portfolio planning you may do. Really important part of the tool. About 8 years ago, Microsoft came up with the concept and actually started deploying something called team resources. And team resources, as you'll see on the right, are groupings of human resources. It may be someone like a sprint team, which is made up of 5 individuals like Jim and Jane and Jack and Sarah and Mike, and they may be working on a specific team so that I can actually apply different work to that team. And individuals can then pick up that work, start to work on it, and report their work, their progress, and their time as they're doing it. Team resources are really great when you're doing actual work and you don't know exactly who's going to do the work, but you have one of a group of individuals that will be assigned that. You can assign the team resource, and then people on that team can go and report their hours or their time against that. So it's really, really useful, especially in an agile or a hybrid environment where you don't have a named resource. You have a group of resources, and it's really, really good for supporting that kind of work. And these are called team resources. And again, they're available in Project Online today. When we set up different kinds of resources, we're also going to set up different kinds. We have capital resources, which are costs or fixed cost. We also have material resources, which are things. When we set up these resources across the board, we're going to put unique information behind each resource. Each resource is going to have a work calendar that's going to have their availability and their exceptions, and that's unique to each individual. They're going to have something called a max units, which is essentially their % availability that they're available to work on projects or non-project work. Resources can also have costs where you can put an hourly cost or a one-time cost in there. And then as you build your work plans, you can do a bottoms-up estimate. How much are the resources going to cost? If I swap people out, does that cost me more or less? By the way, where am I versus where I should have been from a resource cost perspective? It does not replace an ERP or a financial management system. It's really about forecasting that work and then tracking that throughout the project to make sure the project manager knows exactly what the expenditures could be. And finally, you can have any unique information like notes behind this. So resource information is important. Well, we're also going to be setting up what we call custom fields for resources. And this is, as you see on the right, unique metadata about each resource. And again, Microsoft doesn't know how you want to group your resources, but some examples of that would be resource role, resource skill, and having a skill hierarchy, maybe having the location of different resources so you can find people with certain skills in certain places. What division do they work for? What level of competency do they have? Some of this information may be stored in your HR or your finance system, and we can definitely port that over using Project Online's API. But the good thing about resource custom fields is they support capturing of unique information about resources, filtering, matching between people and roles or the individuals and the different generic roles, and also supports your planning and analysis. And we also use this, as we mentioned, as an integral part of integrating with external systems. So resource custom fields allow you to get really unique with what information you want to capture about your resources. Everything starts with having a good, solid work intake process. And that begins with having new project ideas or requests come in centrally through a system. We find a lot of this sometimes comes through an IT service management application and then flows into a project management system. Or if you don't have that in place, you can actually start with a project management system where people would come in and submit a new idea, and then you can upgrade that idea into a specific project request type. So you'll see on the right, there are different project request types here in project. There is an enterprise project, a product development, maybe a marketing and a software one. Each of those could have unique fields of information below them you're going to be capturing to ensure they're all registered properly and follow a consistent intake procedure and process. These are all captured in your project management system in Project Online. As a part of that intake process, you can actually build into that the use of different templates to capture resource demand. And there's a couple of different ways you can capture resource demand in Project Online. The first way is using what we call resource engagements. What resource engagements are, they are pre-project. I've got an idea, I've got an opportunity, I've got a requested project. And what I can do is I can actually put a request in for a specific resource, whether it's a person or a role. So I capture the request as you see in the form on the right, and then that flows in and it alerts a resource manager for that role or individual that there's a request out there. And that resource manager could then do their analysis and start to look at what do I have in my pipeline? What do I have booked? What resource demand do I have for certain people or roles? And then they can do their proper analysis and allocation based off that. Resource engagements are really, really useful for collecting that high level set of requirements at kind of a t-shirt level before I have a project plan or a project schedule of any kind. They're designed to gain operational approvals, and it's used in the project's resource center analysis views as well. So resource engagements were added about 8 years ago, and they're a very, very useful part of your process if you want to include them in your intake. And once we have projects coming into the queue, we can put them through a formal intake and governance process and workflow. And this is really important if you want to make sure people go through the same procedures and processes. As projects come in, they get requested, they get reviewed, they get analyzed, but they also start capturing more information. Maybe after I get the initial analysis on the idea, now I need a business case. I need a cost analysis attached to it. I need a high-level project schedule. But maybe as a step in that, I might need a resource plan or I need a resource engagement that would go in and forecast resource work as I'm forecasting project work. As I'm determining, should I do this project, I also want to determine, can I do it from a resource perspective? And these intake processes and governance workflows can be built out in Project Online to drive these consistent processes, to drive really, really good governance. So you make sure people aren't hopping from I have an idea to now managing a project and you had no idea that change actually occurred. So governance workflow and process is an important part of the procedure as well. Once projects are approved, an important part of the planning process is building out good work plans. And as a part of that, you're going to build out work breakdown structures in Microsoft Project, assign different team members, whether it's an Agile or a waterfall project or some kind of a hybrid between them. But at some point, you have to get time collection. A lot of folks kind of push back on this a little bit and say, well, we're not ready for time collection. Well, the reality is if you want to do detailed resource analysis and capacity planning, you have to capture time. And you have to capture time at either a project or a detailed task level. You can do both in the system, but the idea is you do time tracking in your project management system, which gives you the actuals. It allows you to forecast future where you're going to finish, and then you get your team members involved in the entire process. This can be it can be a change if organizations don't have people tracking time today, but it's really one of the only ways to actually get your actuals. The other way is you can put the burden of updating the actuals on your project managers. And this is probably a good first step if you're doing kind of a crawl, walk, run approach to get into crawling, to get your project managers to build good projects and update the progress in meeting with the team members. Now that is going to create a delay because they're going to have to meet with the team members, update the schedule, progress the schedule and work through that. But if they're already doing that in a manual way, it'll automate some of that. And then you can move into time tracking in a later phase. But time tracking should definitely be on your roadmap if you're looking to do capacity planning. Without that, you're missing a piece of the puzzle. And then we get a lot of questions, what does time tracking look like in Project Online? Well, there are different setup options here, and we're going to go through them. And it's really important because if you use the centralized project time tracking, you're going to be able to track all those different categories of work. And that's important so you can see what people are working on today and what's forecasted so you can see if you have any gaps, opportunities, or if people are over or under allocated. You're going to be able to look at those 4 categories we talked about, tracking time at different levels. So you'll see on the left, we have a Project Online timesheet with these different categories where users can go in and update their actuals and their forecast and put any notes in. And it's at a little different level. We start looking at agile activities as well. So it's actually more detailed than something you'd have in a financial system where you're tracking just at the project level. We're tracking at a lower level than that, a level 1 or 2 below that. So as we start thinking about project work, the goal of tracking project work is to capture the time that's spent on specific activities. We typically set this up at a task level. So we have a project, like the bottom one in the graph, the Billingsley retrofit. Below that, we have a task, new roofing Southside roof, that's assigned to this individual. They've got 300 hours. It's due on 12/11. It started in June, and they can go in and put in their actual, and they can see their actual against their plan and also update their forecast forward. The top, where we have the Atlas tracking software project, this is where we're tracking time at a project level. We may not have the maturity to build detailed work schedules down to a task level, so we create a time tracking activity at that project summary level right below that, and then we have people track their time there, but the project manager is still updating progress down at a task level. And we can do both. We just have to understand we're not going to be able to roll that data down. It's going to be up to the project manager to apply those actuals to the right tasks. This is really important to capture your project work because IT management wants to see how much time was spent and how much is remaining, so you have a forecast. And this is where using a timesheet in a tool like a Project Online can help you, so you can discuss when am I going to finish, and if I'm going to be late, why is that, and do I have a resource constraint? You can answer some of those questions we discussed in the beginning. A lot of folks have a challenge around Agile work, and they say, well, I can't really track time on Agile work. Nature of the work is it's not supposed to be reported down at a day-to-day or week-to-week level from a task management perspective. But the goal of tracking work on an Agile project in your project management system is really to capture effort. It's to capture effort so you can see how much time people are spending on Agile projects versus non-Agile projects and administrative work. So you don't have a schedule. If we look at the top, the CRM implementation project, we have it at a feature level. So we're not talking about the user stories and the specific tasks. We're telling how many hours did you spend working against feature 9 this week. And it will take somebody who's doing that work about a minute to go in and update this information across all of their features. And that's all you're asking for them. And every week, a couple of minutes to go in and update how much time you spend and submit that just so I can report at this level. So I can see how much time have you spent, when do you think you will finish, and that's it. So it may involve having your developers update time in two systems. They may be going to Jira or DevOps and not really updating time there. They're tracking their work progress there. So that's not really a time tracking system. Then they would flip over into Project and update their actuals there. There are some alternatives to this, where if you're tracking at the level of detail required in your Agile system, DevOps or Jira, we can pull that over and then we can update the project schedule accordingly. But there's always going to be a little bit of a disconnect, because if you look at actual and planned, a DevOps system naturally doesn't have that level of data. It's got work done and work remaining, and that's always dynamic. In Project, we have hours per day or hours per week, and we have a baseline against that. So working through that conundrum is a little bit challenging, but we do have some techniques, and we have ways we can layer something on top of the system so that we can aggregate this information and see a full view of a resource's utilization, whether they're working on Agile or traditional work. So if that's a requirement, definitely reach out to us and we can talk through how we see some other organizations doing it. But the reality is you are going to have to track work at some level of detail in your Agile projects. The third category is your KTLO, keep the lights on, maintenance work. The goal here is to capture time spent on non-project work. It's things like help desk tickets, as you'll see in the graph, operational support activities, server maintenance. We're doing it at a summary or a bucket level. So I don't want to know specifically what help desk ticket was log time against. I just want to know that you spent 2 hours against it this week. I want to know you spent 4 hours on operational support on Wednesday, or you did server maintenance on Friday for 2 hours, just so I could forecast that out and say, okay, I thought you'd spend 10% of your time on that. At the end of the year, it looks like you spent about 8. That's pretty close. Whereas help desk tickets, I was budgeting for about 2% of your time. You spent 15%. Wait a second. You're a really, really important project resource to me. I need you spending less time on help desk tickets and more time on project work, which is what's pushing all of our projects out. This is really, really useful to capture these buckets so management can see how much time is spent against these activities versus your traditional project work. And it's best practice really to go in and review this on a quarterly or annual basis. You can do it monthly if you want, but monitoring is going to happen a little less frequently. And finally, the fourth category of time you're going to be capturing is what we call administrative time. So this would be work and non-work related activities, things like sick time, PTO, things that would typically go into a formal timesheet, because it's useful for management to understand when people are not available to work or they're spending their time on other stuff that pulls away from their ability to deliver on their work. This would be something that would always be approved by a manager, and these categories are standard on everybody's timesheet. What that does is it takes a resource, and if you find out they're on vacation next week, they have 0 hours of availability, but they've been booked on 2 projects that are requiring 30 hours of work, it's going to take their work, a project management system, and push it out to the following week, which may delay work for other people and other tasks in general. You want to see that ahead of time. You want to see it before this Friday. You want to see it 2-3 weeks ago, so you can plan around that and maybe come up with an alternative approach where you maybe slip another resource in to help, or take some work off that resource's plate so they can get their work done before their vacation. If you don't have that information in the system, if you're relying on the stuff in your HR system or just remembering it or your PTO clock, it's going to be really hard to do your project planning. So that's why administrative time is really, really important. And just a note about Agile work. We keep getting back to this because Agile is so prevalent today. The nature of Agile is not to track detailed work. Everything in Agile is all about product delivery and seeing value from the investment. It's not about tracking at that detailed level. The key here, and we found with many organizations doing Agile today, whether it's just Scrum or Safe Agile or somewhere in the middle, you need to have a strategy for this. And you need to develop a strategy to allow that your Agile teams to work in a very fluid way, so you're not changing their work style. But that second bullet is really important. You need to figure out a way to give useful updates to management so you can do resource forecasting. And there's a balance there between the two. If you go all in on the first, you'll have nothing on the second, and then you can't forecast and you have no idea what people are working on in 50% of their portfolio. And the key here is having a project management system and a DevOps system like a Jira or Azure DevOps should not create friction. You just need to come up with a strategy on where the data is going to be updated at what level of detail. And again, if you want more information on this, we can definitely provide you with guidance. But there's a lot of organizations successfully managing their portfolio of Agile, Waterfall, all their projects in one place, but letting people work in a system that maps to how they work today, not changing the way they work. That's really, really important. And not trying to treat a system like Jira as a time tracking system, and not trying to treat project as an Agile DevOps system, because they really aren't designed to do that. And we live in a world today that's hybrid, where we're going to be using different tools and different methodologies. So the great thing here is that once we have all this data, we can do lots of analytics and reporting. Analytics can give us insight into the current state of information. On the right side, you see a chart that's got a spreadsheet driven from the project management system that shows planned and actual work by resource over a period of time. And we can start to identify anomalies or areas where you have people that are in the red that are overutilized. It also allows us to look forward, like you see on the graph on the bottom, where we can see different resources with a skill like an analyst, and we can see the trending of the workload coming to that analyst, whether it's an individual or the role that's forecasted, or both in the same graph. And there are some great reporting tools like Power BI today, that let us do this kind of trending, that allow a functional or a resource manager the right tools for the job, so they don't have to pull spreadsheets together, they don't have to sit in meetings. All the data is there for them to do the analysis, identify the red spots, and solve those problems. Right? Pick up the phone and solve the problems. Set up a Teams meeting. Let's address the resource overallocation problem we have here. So having the data is really important to making decisions. We have lots of organizations that are driving these analytics out of Power BI today. Once you have the data, you can get reports like this one that show you for a specific resource, Aaron. You can see at the bottom, Aaron's breakout of work. And we can see the work by health assessment project. He's doing some service management work. And he's got these administrative activities that are taking up a lot of his time. We can see information like what's his hourly rate, what's his max units, as we talked about, how many assignments does he have? And the chart at the bottom is really, really useful. It shows us his capacity as the red line, but then we see certain periods where he's overutilized, where we've got more demand for Aaron's time than we have capacity, and his availability is negative. This is really, really important stuff we want to see. As we look at the chart at the top, we can see for the first 4 months of the year, he's over capacity. Then we go down. So we may want to look at a different resource with the same skills that's under capacity that we can switch out and figure out which of Aaron's tasks could be best done by a different individual, whether it's project or non-project activities, help desk activities, Agile or Waterfall work. And by having this data, we can start to drill into it. We can start to look at groups, and we can start to say, well, what type of work is our group doing? We can see at the top all the different projects, Agile, infrastructure, Waterfall. We can down at the bottom see for each named resource, the work they're doing from a maintenance perspective, from a project perspective that's Agile, Waterfall work, infrastructure work, all in one place. We get a full look at all of the things a resource is working on, so we can do proper analysis and make really good decisions about it. Get away from the spreadsheets and the phone calls, have it all in one system, and be able to sit down in a management meeting and have an intelligent discussion about this stuff and actually forecast forward. We can also start to look at different roles and say, do we have certain roles here, like the role of the project manager in red, where we have way more demand than we have people? And we can start to see which projects are driving that demand. I've got 2 or 3 or 4 projects that are really eating into my project manager's time versus my engineering time, which we're okay on right now. And you can drive these kind of analytics and even get down to a point where you've got different resource graphs where you're looking at capacity down at the bottom by department. By using some of those custom fields, we can see, what's the assigned work versus capacity. We can see for HR, we have a lot more capacity than assigned work, but for IT, which is pretty normal, a lot more assigned work than capacity. We can even see by program on the right, if we want to capture it, which programs are driving our resource assignments and capacity, how does our availability over time go, and how do we map that? Then we can be dynamic with how we do our reports. At the end of the day, you're going to be able to provide useful management reports that start to break it down by a certain person or a certain group or a certain director. And then we can see charts and graphs like we see the one in the middle here that shows what's the breakup of my team from a maintenance, incident, project, break fix, administrative. I thought I'd be spending about 30 or 40% of my time on projects, which are critical. But if I look at this, it's about 14%. And by the way, if I go down to the bottom, I start looking at specific types of projects I'm doing and breaking that up into different categories. So I can get very granular to make sure I'm working on the right things and I've got the people to work on the right things. And if I can't, why is that? And do I have a resource challenge? Do I have a planning challenge? What is the problem that I'm trying to address? So by using these tools together, you have some great analytics and reports, again, using tools like Project Online and Power BI to do your capacity planning. So with all that said, how do you move forward? What are some good lessons learned that we've got from working in this? And it all begins with having a good process of sitting down and figuring out, what's the problem you're trying to solve and what process could you put in place based off the maturity of your organization, maturity of your people, maturity of your project data to actually get to an improved level. And we typically look at that crawl, walk, run, fly approach, which is very popular with the analysts, and you can define that. But, a really, really good key practice, if we look back at all the organizations we work with, that what do they have in common? Our experience shows that there's a direct correlation between improving your project schedule management capability and the ability to successfully, accurately plan and manage your resources. We've worked with literally hundreds of organizations that take a resource-first approach. They do very rudimentary project management processes. They don't work on education. They don't work on improving that. What this leads to is a gap in the middle. It results in not having enough information to support good planning or people. You focus on the stuff on the right without focusing on the left, and they're intimately tied together. There's no way to really decouple those. A really good first step here is to work with your project management community to improve and mature their project management capabilities. The more detailed they can become comfortable with managing and planning and tracking, the more detail you're going to have on the right side of the picture. And then you're going to be able to get information such as what people are working on, how much work are they getting done, and what are some of the gaps and opportunities there. T-shirt sizing we found at that high level in a spreadsheet, it's fine for annual planning, but when it comes down to delivering your projects, you need task and work level detail at a plan, actual, and forecast level to accurately plan your projects and your resources. An example of this in some organizations we work with is setting up time tracking task level on a project, but they manage the detail work separately on Agile projects. Work gets performed again in your Jira or DevOps system, but they track time in project. So project becomes your time tracking system for Agile projects, but Jira or DevOps is your work management system, right? And what you should really think about doing is breaking your work down to a level of detail that you can track against. Do I want to track it epics or sprints? In order to have detailed metrics that map between the two systems, you really got to think about that level of detail and what you want to report off of. It may be a little more work up front and take a little more planning, but the results give you the ability to understand and plan resources based on what they're really doing, which is really the goal here. The key here is better planning and better scheduling capabilities. People spend a lot of time out doing upfront planning, they get excited, and then the project kind of goes on its way. There really needs to be consistent reinforcement of these standards throughout the planning and execution process to successfully deliver. So we definitely recommend you take a look at that. And some key steps for doing good practices here. Number one, focus any of your training efforts on improving the planning and execution. That's where you find out the details on all of your projects. That's where you're going to measure these results. Understand and align with how Microsoft interprets resource management. It's not a drop it and everybody uses it the same. In fact, this is one of those areas where you drop it in and everybody uses it completely differently. And there's there's a lot of flexibility here to do that crawl, walk, run, and support multiple methodologies and different ways people work. You just have to work through the nuances, have the discussions, design the solution properly, implement the process and the technology together. You also want to think about implementing resource management as a phase, and it's a part of every phase of your PPM rollout. So maybe initially you want to improve project management, reporting, collaboration, but have a thread of resource management in there. Maybe a phase 2 in 6 or 12 months is now we've got some good information on our projects and basic resources. We want to go from role-based planning to named resource planning, and we're going to start doing time tracking. That can be a phase 2. Then we want to improve on that and start doing portfolio analysis because we've got 12 or 18 months worth of data on our resources and our projects to do those in alignment with one another. You can think about it as a phased approach and incorporating a thread of resource management in every phase. You definitely, and I think we've hit on this a couple times today, develop a plan for tracking your Agile work that doesn't change how your Agile teams work, but it provides the level of detail you need to actually do your analysis and track and report in the right way. That's really, really important. And that's going to take working with the folks on the Agile team. They're going to have to open their minds a little bit to this and the concept of you're not adding friction, you're just adding tracking. And you also want to think about partnering with organizations that have done this before, whether you've got other partner organizations, whether partnering with a company like PROJILITY, folks that have brought resource management to the table have seen it and done that a bunch of times, and we can point you in the right direction and walk through some of the gotchas. So, our goal today was give you some overview and guidance on how to do better capacity planning, put better procedures in place around it, and how you can use some of these technologies. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor back to Sarah Howard, and Sarah, we can jump into any questions folks might have.
Thanks, Rob. As mentioned, we'll now open the floor to Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box window where I will read your questions aloud. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box window and I'll read them aloud. Well, Rob, it looks like your presentation was so thorough that we don't have any questions today. So hopefully today's session gave you all some ideas as to how the Microsoft technology can help support your needs for improved for capacity planning. So if you're interested in digging deeper to determine how the solution could meet your needs, or if you're already using it and looking for ways to drive improvements in the system and related processes, feel free to reach out. We'll set up time and we'll set up time with you to ask questions and provide you with guidance and an understanding of what's required. So my contact information is listed here. So again, we want to thank you for joining our webinar today. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or specific training or implementation requirements you might have. I'm Sarah Howard with PROJILITY, and we will see you on our upcoming fall. We'll see you at our next event. Thank you all.